Thank you so much for showing up. We have Miss Bharati Balakrishnan, Country Head and Director of India and Southeast Asia at Shopify with us. I just, before giving the mic to her and letting her introduce herself, I'd just like to tell you some numbers, right? In their recent Entrepreneur Index report that Shopify just came out with, they had a number that Shopify's impact to GDP in India is about $1.8 billion. And they're creating about 220,000 jobs in India, all of their brands included, right? So that is the scale that Shopify is operating in India today. And now I'll just, let Miss Bharti talk about herself. Bharti, tell us, how has been your journey? How do you look at India market? And, what's been Shopify's take on India market today?
Sure. Thank you, Apurva, for starting us like that. And thank you, everyone, for being here. Good afternoon. I'm just here to share the wonderful story of Shopify. You probably know us very well as a global company, but I'd love to add some color in the India context, and especially what we've been doing in the last couple of years here. So, Apurva, if we were to take a step back, we think of our journey in India in 3 phases. I think in the first phase, in the early 2010s, Shopify itself is only 17 years old. We've been in India for a large part of that, maybe 12, 13 years now. And I'd say from about 2010 to 2015, when we really started stepping out of Canada and North America, India's role in the Shopify ecosystem was really about the partners. As you may know, we're a product company, and a lot of what we do is delivered to the end customer, in this case, a merchant, via partners who are typically agencies who run their own shops and are entrepreneurs in their own right, or developers and tech partners like you all. But I think around the mid-2010s, India started becoming a merchant market, primarily because e-commerce in India reached that $10 billion mark annually in GMV. And the first few D2C brands were born, which are all household names today, like a Boat, like a Sugar. And we're very proud that they've all grown up with us. We've grown up with them. And we started working on sort of making the product more relevant to India, including things like solving for cash and delivery, etc. And I'd say in the last 5 years, we've really come into our own stride. Some of it obviously has been put on steroids by COVID. We find a lot of the traditional brands or the established brands have learned e-commerce now. Payments and shipping are solved problems. So we find, the traditional brands have taken their brand.com very seriously now, whether it is to deliver an omni-channel strategy, or it is to reach new markets, or it is to just deliver a better discovery experience for the customer, because no matter where the customer is shopping, he is coming and looking at you on your website first. So the Duroflexes, Jockeys, Westsides, they've all sort of become a part of the Shopify family. And today we're at a point where we only see this growing from stride to stride. The D2C ecosystem is thriving. There are new brands every day. And the traditional brands are starting to take their own website very seriously. And those are the tailwinds we're riding today in India.
That's amazing, Tell us, I think you see a lot of these brands, right, at different stages. A lot of them in India today, I feel, are, below that 100 crore mark. And the struggles in reaching to that 1 crore annual revenue mark, and then to 10 crores, and then to 100 crores is very different. Talk to us about the pain points that you see these D2C brands struggling with at different stages in their journey.
Yeah, stage is the key word. I'd say, depending on the stage you're at, the challenges are very different, as would be true in any business, but especially while building a brand. I'd say there are about 2 or 3 that come to mind. Some of these are global. I think inflation is a real challenge today. The cost of making any product, regardless of category, has gone up, especially after COVID. And whether to pass that on to a customer or not, whether to increase prices or not, whether to reduce margins, are serious challenges across the board. So if you are grappling with some of that, know that you're not alone. We see this every day across brands. The second is it's fiercely competitive. If you're building a new brand in India today, it's fiercely competitive. It is not like it was 5 years back. I think there's a very good D2C playbook. Whenever people ask me for a playbook, I tell them, just go to LinkedIn, man. Everyone's putting out one every day. This is a solved problem. If you want to build a D2C brand today, there's like 2 pages to read and get started, right? But building a big brand that outlives you and me is no trivial challenge. It wasn't even in the old world, by the way. I used to be at Big Bazaar before this, so I've seen many brands being built in the offline world. Building a brand takes time. It is not like building a tech platform, and rushing that process hasn't worked for anybody. But competition is real. As easy as it is to get started today, there are as many people like you or me who want to build a D2C brand. The third one that comes to mind is loyalty is a real challenge. I think people are very focused on acquisition, rightly so, because you're just getting started. But there's very little focus, I find, on trying to get that customer to make the second purchase. You may be the best brand, you may have delivered on the exact promise that you offered on a banner, and it's still hard to get a customer back. Because in many, many categories, the fact is consumers are experimenting. And I find a lot of brands don't do much between the first purchase and the second, or the second and the third. We're so rapidly focused on acquisition. So I think loyalty in general has become a big challenge across brands. From where we sit, that's what we see, yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think you hit that point very correctly when you said that there is a lot of competition, right? And to be very frank with you, I think I have reduced my Instagram usage because there are so many brands showing me ads left, right, and center. So I can imagine how difficult it must be for a brand to differentiate themselves in this crowded space, right? What are some of the ways that they differentiate themselves in? What do they use? Do they focus on retention a lot? Do they focus on loyalty a lot? Could you, from your experience, some case studies, share some examples of how they are dealing with this?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't think there's one answer. Again, it really goes back to the stage. I find brands abroad do it really well, more so. I think there are younger brands in India who do it well. Look, at the early stage, the founder is so involved in the brand. Very often, the brand is an extension of the founder's personality. So, that little thing about sending a note to your customer, or doing those 5 calls a day as the founder or a senior member of the team, those things really matter because the trust is actually built with you as an individual and less with the brand. It's true for any startup, by the way. Very long back, I started a company. I was employee number 2. And I think most people who I sold to bought because they met me versus who we stood for, right? That's just how all businesses start, all relationships start. So I think at the early stage, it's very important for the founder to sort of almost be the face of the brand, if you will. But as you grow up, putting processes in place are very important. And I think we are so focused on when something goes wrong that we rarely do a lot when something goes right. So as an example, there are small brands on Shopify who'd use something called flows. I don't know if some of you here are Shopify merchants, but there's a very simple feature called flows, which lets you basically write an if-else statement, right? So if the customers come back for the 3rd time, ship him a freebie from the warehouse. These are little things that create delight that you can use technology to do that maybe you were doing individually when you were 10 orders a day, right? So focus on your super customer at the early stage. Delight them so they go and talk to many people. As you scale up, I think operational efficiency is very important. I cannot underline more. I'll give you an example of a very big brand like Duroflex, who runs their enterprise business online on Shopify. But recently, Duroflex also integrated their Shopify POS with all their EBOs, which I think now are about 40 or 50, I'm not sure. So when you go into a Duroflex store now, if you've ever shopped online, I know exactly what you bought. I know when you bought it. And similarly, for someone who came in and placed a query offline, I'm able to collect information that goes back. These sound like things that I think we've been talking about for many, many years. But technology today has made it quite simple to do these things. And being thoughtful in how you use technology from day one really goes a long way in how you eventually differentiate in front of the customer. Keeping all this aside, a brand ultimately survives because it differentiates, and D2C is no different. I think unlike North America, I've not seen brands truly be D2C only here. There are very few. You can be D2C first because it's always easy to learn from the channel. You get first-hand customer feedback, which you don't get on the marketplaces. You don't get in GT or MT. But beyond that, any brand that reaches 100 crores in India, whether today or yesterday or 20 years back, has always been in more than one channel. That's just reality. So from day one, planning for that, and then thinking about what your product is that transcends these channels is very important. I find that the best founders globally, they spend all their time on the product and the value prop and very little time on everything else. Maybe that's something to learn from. Yeah.
Got it. So I agree that that's something that we have also seen within WebEngage and outside also, that a lot of these brands have to build an omni-channel presence as they grow big, right? And with that comes the challenges of having a lot of data, right?
Yeah.
They have a lot of data scattered around different channels. Bringing all of that data together and making sense of it and actually acting upon it, either it's to build loyalty or to do anything else, retention, anything else. How do you see that people are using data today, right? In what ways do you see that?
Yeah, so one example we spoke about, the single view of customer. For established brands, I would highly recommend from day zero, you got to be there because you are sitting on a gold mine of data versus D2C brands. You have so many customers who have already bought from you. So setting up your POSs to collect data, sending them to a common data lake, making sure your inventory data is flowing there as well, making sure your online data is flowing there as well. This feels like a big mountain to climb. It's really worth climbing. But beyond that, if I were to give you some other examples, I think it's really like focusing on who your customer is. So one merchant in Malaysia comes to mind called Flower Chimp. They're a flower delivery service. And I remember when Nicholas, the founder, was talking about how they think about their business and how they use data. He's like, one of the numbers I watch is what % of my marketing spend goes into retention technology and then retention marketing, right? Which was, I was a little bit like, really? Like, you're still in growth mode. You're like acquiring customers. But he's like, look, I sell flowers. And the average household, I think, at least uses flower delivery twice a year. It's probably much more than that. It's probably 4 or 5. But my obsession is how do I get X% of my customers to shop from me twice a year? What does that add up to, and does that get my growth? It felt to me like something very simple, but something that you can really lose sight of in the everyday, right? And this answer is, of course, different by category. And when you're very early, focusing on this answer may not get you to your target growth. But to know how much of the growth can come from this and to obsess over getting that and to use the right technology to do that is really important. So something like flows on Shopify just lets you do that on day zero, or eventually merchants use someone like a WebEngage because it gets more complex with time. You want to create different journeys, but also focusing on what exactly you're saying between a purchase, So you've come today and gone and I've forgotten you till you come back again. Or I'm just torturing you with like non-stop remarketing, But what am I really saying to you? What do I really want to say to you? Do I have a view on what you're likely to buy next? And how do I graduate you to that purchase? Really making sure your content reflects all that. Being a little thoughtful, I think, goes a long way. Using data to leverage what is a low-cost transaction for you should feed into how much money you open up for acquisition. So another example I'll give you is we always tell traditional brands, have an app on day one. If you're a D2C brand, take your time because you may not even be at 100,000 customers yet. But with a traditional brand, you have people coming every day to your stores and they're leaving and you have no way to engage with them beyond an SMS or an email if they've given you that. But if they're on a mobile app and they start talking to you, there's so much more you can do with them. So little things like that capture data and thoughtfully use them in low-cost ways to do more with the customer, then let you put more money into really expensive acquisition channels. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant, actually. Okay, makes sense. Could you talk to us about, some of the aspirations of these brands with all of this, building retention, building loyalty, and scaling up in India? What are they aspiring for today? Do you see, brands selling outside of India? Do you see them going B2B? What about mass India, right? Are they selling a lot in mass India? Where do you see D2C wave going in India?
Yeah, so I'd like to reiterate the lesson I've learned, and honestly, I've been a merchant far longer than I've been on the platform side, is you always have to think of India in slices, right? The day you think it's a billion people market is the day you make the biggest mistake. And many brands have come and made that mistake in the decades that have seen retail grow in India. We see typically, at a very high level, two broad buckets, right? There are brands who are selling at a 1,500 plus price point, 2,000 rupees plus price point, regardless of category. Obviously, there's mobile phones and electronics, which always operate at higher price points. But broadly speaking, you should know that you're in a premium bucket when it comes to the Indian consumer and know exactly who that market is. And that's where a lot of brands are starting to use cross-border as a way to reach the Indian diaspora, if not a wider audience, right? So a lot of fashion brands in India typically cater to, I'd say, what we'd call India One, people with high disposable income in India, unlikely shopping on the marketplaces, usually going to brand.com, but also then servicing the Indian diaspora globally. So many brands today are highly profitable, and they ship to Australia, Canada, UK, GCC, and dare I say, we make it really easy with Shopify Plus. You could set up 10 expansion stores at the same time with the relevant payment methods and do it. So we see that's one trend. The second trend is if you're sort of more mass, right? And you're really operating in a white space. What's happened, I think, and we were talking about this, Apurva, a while back. Around 2017-18, right? I used to be on the platform side. I was running a bunch of categories at Paytm. There were many categories we didn't take seriously, because at that point the market was at about $15 billion. So the very few categories that crossed the $1 billion mark that then became a market that's attractive to actually start a brand online. Today that has completely changed. At $40-50 billion, depending on what data source you use, there are several billion-dollar categories. So categories like fitness accessories, health accessories, fashion accessories, a lot of I think someone mentioned Bliss Club, a Shopify brand again. A lot of these brands are born because these categories have become meaningful online. So finding that white space and leveraging online channels, not just your brand.com, but marketplaces as well, and then quickly moving offline where it makes sense is really keen. And honestly, even in the 2010s or the 90s when, an all was built or, many of the iconic Indian brands were built, they were not built in one channel, They were built in their EBOs, they were built in the big bazaars and the Reliances, and they were also built eventually online. So I don't think that has changed. D2C makes it easy to get started, but depending on which cohort of consumer you're chasing, you have to be very careful to make sure you're entering all the channels at the right stage that your consumer is in.
Perfect. I think I also see the same way, right? And especially with Shopify and the increasing adoption in India, I do see that a lot of brands have been coming up also, and it's become increasingly easier for them to set up shops and sell anywhere in world, right? Yeah. So maybe now we can open up to one or two questions if there are any from the audience, if that's okay. Sure. Are there any questions? Yeah. Is there a mic that we can give?
You mean are there MSMEs coming to the platform? Yeah. We look at that as merchant growth. I think there continues to be tremendous growth in India on merchants adopting digital tools, including people like us. I think COVID's definitely sort of helped accelerate that journey. We see merchants start to use someone like us. Earlier they would start with their social group on WhatsApp or Instagram, or a Facebook marketplace. And then once they see a certain flow of orders, they would sort of do this full time and then come online to us. But we see that journey has definitely started earlier now. Also, things have become simpler, right? I think a good product should compound, and that's happened to us as well. So I think there are many merchants who today aspire to sell globally. And because payments and shipping is solved in India, it's much easier to start a business today than it was 5 years back. We also have a starter plan. I don't know if you've seen that. It's I think it's $399 a month or something. So it's really easy to get started and try things. So definitely we see a lot of small single entrepreneurs or homemakers start much early today than before. Yeah.
There's one there. Oh, okay.
So first of all, it's a great product. Yeah. So my question is like you talked about retention and all. So, but when somebody tries Shopify, last 3 years ago, situation was too different in terms of marketing. Like Facebook ads were working very well, influencer marketing was working very great. But now, today, in the last 1 year, situation is very changed. Every big brand D2C is going offline. Facebook ads is not working anymore, right? So what do you think? Like, put some highlights on that. Ki how what is working now and what is working for like 2024? How someone can make a good brand out of it?
Isn't that like a $1 billion question?
Yeah, I feel someone who's running a business today is probably better positioned than me to answer. I've not been running a brand now for 2 or 3 years, but to be honest, like I feel a strong focus on loyalty, which I've never seen in my. I've been here almost 3 years now. I did not see that in about a year back. So good brands are very focused on building how they need to grow bottom up. So, the brands who are at like, let's say, 100 crores plus a year overall, I see them do the math on how much they're going to get from their repeat customers and how, at what cost, and then budget what they're going to put into acquisition, right? And even with influencers, I think there's far more maturity in the industry today on when you're doing it for awareness and when you're doing it for trial and purchase, right? So there's things like Shopify collabs. I don't know if you've tried it. You should try that. Make it easy to manage influencers now, which wasn't there even 2 years back. So it shouldn't cost you a lot to try something. That's our goal. So I see a lot of good brands use collabs to work with 100 influencers easily, where earlier maybe, because they have to do it back and forth on email and they have to hire a resource. It constrains how much you do, and a lot more influencers are willing to work on a variable model than before. Now, I don't know how long it will last, but today I see that trend, right? And the last one I'd say is absolutely brands are going offline earlier. If you ask me, that should have happened even 5 years back. For some reason, it didn't. I mean, to me, India has always been this retail dense market. And you can never be, even if you're in one city, you need to be in more than one channel, So we see that, but also there's something called B2B as an offering we have now. We didn't have that 2 years back in the same manner. So we see a lot of brands use that to extend their distribution. So for example, I might be a very metro-focused brand, but I'm seeing demand come in from Ujjain or Indore. It doesn't make sense for me to really set up a store or set up even a distributor. I'm worried I may not be able to feed them. But I can orient them to the Shopify B2B store and help do that business. So we're also seeing brands get into B2B much earlier, in line with getting into offline, I suppose. Yeah.
I think we'll take just one last question.
Hi, Akash here. Great, insightful talk, Bharati. Lovely. My question would be slightly focused towards Shopify support in India.
Okay, hi, sorry.
Hi. So it'll be focused towards Shopify support in India, because over the past 6-7 years, I think I've set up more than 20-25 Shopify stores, and now at Local Ferment Co, we ourselves are using Shopify, and we are using all the new features of 2.0 also. And something as simple as, let's say, GST brackets in the Shopify feature for, like, say, a multi-product company like ours, where we have like 5-6 product categories and they all have different GSTs. It's a big pain to set that up. Plus a bunch of coding issues when it comes to Shopify too. So how does one reach out to support very quickly? Because we've been evaluating air menus, Dukaan, quite a few, and let's say Dukaan is just like 3 kilometers from our office. So how do you prevent attrition from a brand, let's say ours, to go to a different platform? I mean, we love the UX of Shopify and the customizability of it, but support would be my main question. How do I directly get support?
Yeah, I think support is a very layered level of service, right? It's always been at Shopify. I have to start by saying, look, we are a product company. We put out product as a platform that people can build on and take further. And when we try to build a commerce product that serves 175 countries where we are the first to acknowledge that we can't build all the features ourselves. Then we wouldn't be able to service 175 countries. So tax, like you mentioned, is a great example of that, right? If we had to build tax for every country, it would become incredibly complex, and I'm quite sure we wouldn't do the best job of it, which is why we have plugins like a WebPlanX or a GST, I forget the name, who work with us. And we're a big fan of partners like WebEngage and other tech partners who work in our ecosystem. And India actually has the biggest ecosystem, I think globally. We have about 8,000 apps or something at Shopify, and India is the second biggest contributor to that. So for us, the app partners are as much a part of our stack as we are. You know, without them, we are not a complete solution. In terms of reaching Shopify support, we're a global company, global support, and mostly we've been very responsive. But I'd always encourage merchants, especially in India, where we're not big fans of doing it ourselves. We like to sort of have someone hold our hands, work with partners. We have a very wide partner network. Happy to introduce you to a few offline. You can find them easily online on Reddit. I mean, it's a very thriving ecosystem. But typically, merchants who are very successful with Shopify in India will always work with a partner. That's a good starting point, yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I think Bharati's around if you have any remaining questions. But yeah, I think we'll end here in the interest of time. Thank you so much, guys.
WebEngage. Retention simplified.